Hello and welcome to Night Clerk Radio. This is episode 109, Film Rescoring. We're getting into cinema today. We're an artistic podcast now. No more lowly vaporwave. We're all about,
that's right. Kino.
Yeah, the Kino. I'm thinking the champagne of arts. The Ford F-150 of arts. The highest of the high. Film.
I mean,
yeah.
Ford F-150 works if you just talk about big films.
Well, yeah, and those are the only good ones we're talking about, right?
That's why they're in all the theaters. The market has spoken.
Yeah. I can't wait to see Twisters. Good thing it's not going to be mentioning climate change.
Double feature with Beetlejuice 2.
Yeah. Oh, God. Yes. Just bringing back all the hits.
Love a legacy sequel. They're always good.
Mm-hmm. So silent films. Well, films in general, they have music. And it turns out usually the music is made for the movie or for the purposes of enhancing, like it's the director and the people who work on the editors, they pick the music for the movie and that's how it's done. But it turns out you can just take a movie and change the music later on.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is something that has happened, in fact, more than once, particularly for silent films, because they're silent. They had to be rescored every single time they were shown back, in the day, because people who ran movie theaters realized that music made movies more entertaining and kept people in the seats. So yeah.
Let's get some fucking 13-year-old to bang a piano during the movie.
Yeah, they had those custom instruments that just had sound effects, klaxons and all kinds of things. This was sort of spurred on this discussion. This idea, I think, was inspired by TerraVision, a friend of the podcast, because they released Dante's Inferno, the 1911 silent film classic, with several rescored versions of it, including one of their own. The person who owns TerraVision also runs a record label called Grayface Recordings, and they had one of their artists rescore the movie. But this has been going on for a long time, right?
Sure. Dante's Inferno is interesting. I think this is a cool topic because I would like to talk about film more. I know we're branded as a music podcast, of course, so we have to talk about film scoring, but we did this podcast because we wanted to learn more about topics, right? But I think if I really had to do a podcast about something, it would be about film, because that's what I know. That's what I like. So this is a really exciting opportunity to chat about film.
Yeah.
So I think we have two large topics today, which we can do in any order. Kind of already introduced the TerraVision Dante's Inferno, which is really what inspired this episode to begin with. First of all, because like you said, we've done TerraVision stuff before, and it was TerraVision who did the Copperhead.
Yes.
So, conflict of interest. But
yeah, they did not sponsor this episode.
This is not sponsored by TerraVision. I bought that
Blu-ray legitimately. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. I didn't get a promo copy or anything, which is great. And then the other one I want to talk about is kind of what's colloquially called the Soderbergh variations, which we can do in, like I said, any order. I guess we'll just do Dante's because we've kind of already mentioned it. So Dante's Inferno it's a 1911 classic Italian silent film. It's famous for being, kind of the first feature-length film and kind of one of the first widely shown horror films. And it's actually really interesting for its time because it had a lot of special effects, a lot of gore for the time.
Yes.
Like people generally think of media at that time being very chaste, but kind of pre-Hays Code, which was like a standardization of content that happened in the US about like, you can't show cops losing, you can't show people sharing a bed, that kind of censorship.
Yeah, I think that was 1932.
Yeah, and lasted into like late 50s, early 60s.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
Which is why like in I Love Lucy, they have kids but sleep in separate beds and stuff. It's very silly. But it's interesting because, it had a lot of special effects for the time, a lot of gore for the time. There's a lot of cool things. The film, the title Dante's Inferno tells you the plot because it's basically the first part of the Divine Comedy where Dante is toured through hell and he gets to see all the horrible abominations. It was actually kind of like Christian propaganda of the time. It was meant to be like, look how awful hell is. You don't want to end up like that. Better believe in God, which is interesting. Well,
it's also Dante dunking on people he doesn't like. Like it's writing, in some ways, fan fiction about real people.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, because he does meet like Dido and all these other famous figures. But I think the film itself at the time.
Okay, yeah.
Was like meant to be kind of Christian. Propaganda is like kind of a polemicist word, but it was meant to be like a pro. I don't know. It's like the American Carol of the 1910s. I don't know.
It's
a terrible reference. Sorry.
Yeah. No. I think in general, it was designed with a very Christian perspective, but like that was how you sold like nudity and gore back then. Was that like we had to it's either artistic. Here's this artistic nude of a woman that you can gaze at our Nickelodeon for 5 cents, or you can be see the visions of hell, and we have severed human heads in this one, that kind of thing.
That's right.
Yeah. So I think that was just a marketing, like a way to get around censors and
a little bit. It's hard to disentangle that from maybe the actual faith of anybody making it. It's interesting because they do get away with some great shots for the time. Like, like the dude being forced to carry around his severed head.
Yes,
like the little black screen. Is awesome. It's such like a good shot. Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you just think of doing it over 3 years with like no idea what you're doing, there's no pedigree for these types of effects. You kind of got to figure it out as you go.
Yeah. Think about it. It's 1911. Like film has been around like maybe as a technology like less than 20 years. Like maybe 10 years for narrative film, or something like that. They're all still figuring out. It's all brand new. They don't know what they're doing. There's no standards. There's no safety standards for one thing. Like all those shots of all those people in robes walking on these very real caves and like, that looks pretty slippery. Don't trip, Virgil,
Yeah. And also being feature length for the time. So it actually had like a huge box office return because it was so long that the studios would charge more money. They'd use it as an excuse. Compared to films at the time. I mean, not 10 years prior, like the Lumiere brothers were just making like 2 to 3 minute shorts. It's to go from that to feature length in 10-ish years is like a pretty big technical accomplishment. So it's a little bit of like the film. There's, of course, a beautiful Blu-ray release by TerraVision. It's a 4K remaster. It's in its original kind of, there's 2 versions, right? There's black and white and then like a red tinted version, I believe.
There are a couple different versions of it, actually.
A visual version?
Yeah,
okay.
I think there's 3 visual versions of it. There is the black and white, obviously. There's the red tinting. There is, let's see here, tinted version, red tinted version. Like the tinted version changes colors. And then there's just pure red tinted and then there's black and white. And they have slightly different like remastering because this film is heavily scratched. There's a lot of damage. I mean, it's
100-year-old negative.
Yeah,
like it's amazing they got anything.
Yeah.
So it's super impressive. The reason that matters is because I think in the previous years there've been a lot of colorized releases of it. So they Ted Turnered it and released it in black and white. That's also a very timely reference. Everyone in 2024 knows about the colorization wars. But the big thing, and the thing that's really relevant for this podcast, is that they have 3 scores, like you were saying. Like a really impressive effort, because that's a lot of scoring to do and to put together. So you said, I think we're both most familiar, just in terms of having time to kind of do this, we're both familiar with the Haley score.
Yes.
Which is like probably the most modern of the 3. It's a very post-rocky. It's a lot of guitar and piano and
Haley is the recording artist for Grey Face, and so it was made specifically for this Blu-ray. Because there have been previous versions of it. Like they use material from the Redwood Creek 2022 restoration. So but this is the one. Like this Blu-ray came out in 2023.
Yeah, late. That was about 6 months ago, I think, something like that. So then there's like an organ soundtrack from Michael Kiker. And then there's a Belgian pianist did a 3rd score, and that's Laurent Pigelet, which I'm less familiar with those 2.
Yeah, I mean, they're perfectly fine. I listened to parts of them. There's also a commentary from a film historian, James Neubauer. So, if you want to get some historical context for it, you can listen to that. I listened to a little bit of it. Guy seems to know what he's talking about, but I've watched this movie probably like 2 times now, like bits and chunks, like the entire thing with Haley, and then like bits and chunks of the other 2. So I did not need to watch it a 3rd time for the commentary. At least now.
You should watch it in silence, Ross, so you can make a truly meaningful comparison.
I need a shouting 1911 audience.
No, you sit and watch respectfully.
I don't think they did that back then.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, shows what I know, I guess. So yeah, so let's talk about the Haley soundtrack. What are your initial thoughts on it?
It's not what I was expecting, I think is the first reaction is because it's such a horror. Like I was expecting, like it didn't match what I was expecting for individual scenes. I was expecting a more intense, more horrific, more suspense driven, but it's more meditative as like a post-rock, journey through hell. But I quite liked it. I actually watched it with some friends, and it actually helped make the mood more like we were all just really engrossed with this movie. We was seeing these, 1911 special effects. And so the post-rock, it does pick up towards the end once we get to the bottom of hell and getting to Satan. It really gets very intense. But of course it begins sort of on the surface and dealing with less intense things. So it was a pleasant surprise, I guess is the best way to put it, because it was a lot of really interesting synth work, a lot of interesting guitar, and not what I was expecting, which I guess is one of the points of doing a film rescoring in general is to do something that's not the obvious thing.
Right.
Yeah, it made me think about rescoring films and why you would do that. So that was sort of my overall impression of it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that last point of that, taking the opportunity to not do something that's so obvious and so tropey, because it would be easy to do a very classic horror soundtrack and put this over. So it would be very effective because the visuals work so well. And I think when you take these super effective visuals, we'll talk about this also with some of the Soderbergh stuff, and you put very different or unexpected music over it, it almost stops being a film in a weird way, not in an insulting way. It becomes more like this different experience.
Yeah.
Closer to a music video where the music then becomes kind of front and center. And the visuals take the back seat. Yeah, it flips what you kind of pay attention to. And I'm actually wish I had done a bit more research for this because there are other scored versions of this in the past 20 years.
Yeah.
So in 2004, there was a version with Tangerine Dream, which I'd be very interested in because they are very famous as not just as a band, but doing scores for movies.
Oh, sure.
Through the 70s and 80s, a lot of the early synth scores. And then there was a 2011 restoration in Italy that had an electroacoustic score or a composition for piano. So it had a solo piano piece or kind of an electroacoustic score. And I haven't heard any of those. I'm going to go seek them out actually and see if I can find them because all of that sounds interesting. And I'd like to hear what other people did with it, especially Tangerine Dream.
Yeah, I think that's the key here. Now that I think about it, is the transformative aspect of rescoring a film is that you're not my original. We'll do the obvious thing of making it a horror movie score. It's well, that's this is a silent film over 100 years old. It's not going to play. It's not going to scare anybody. Why?
No, you wouldn't put violin. Psycho violin or something. It would be cheesy.
But the first thing when you think of a film rescoring, my first thought is actually have you ever watched The Wizard of Oz with Dark Side of the Moon playing?
Yeah.
It totally syncs up, I'm telling you. And is to transform the movie into something new. This kind of musical alchemy. And that's sort of the point of it, is not to I could have done it better than this guy. I could have done it better than the original composer. It's no, I'm going to totally transform the movie through the music. And I think that's the allure of it. And, there's other silent films that have done this or that have been rescored. It seems to actually be a lot of groups have done this now. I think Goblin has done this with some silent films. I want to say Nosferatu. I'm not sure though. But yeah.
Another example that pops in my head that I know I've heard, but I would need to re-listen to because it's probably been 25 years or whatever, is that in the 50s, Miles Davis improv'd a soundtrack just while watching the movie with his quartet.
Of Inferno?
No, not Inferno. It was a French film. His name I'm blanking on. But yeah, they were just he brought 4 people into the studio and they just projected the movie and they just improv'd.
Oh man, that's sick.
I'd have to look it up.
Yeah.
I'll post it in the show notes because it's easy to find. It's a famous example.
Nice.
But yeah, his quintet just did a weird modal jazz, 50s. modal jazz improv over a French film, which rules.
Yeah. So I think like what Haley was trying to do with this movie, now that we're thinking about this in this way, I think is, kind of a contemplation on Inferno itself, to think about the imagery and journey that Dante is going through. And yeah, now I'm really curious. So maybe because it's less intense than what you would expect from hell. Like it's more meditative. So like, is Haley saying that hell isn't what we think it is? Or I don't know. Or is it just like an intuitive reaction to the imagery of the film?
Yeah, I'd really like to know what that process is. So
yeah,
you bought it. Now, I know they typically include a lot of writing with their Blu-rays. I know there's some like historical essays, I think, included.
That might just be the slipcase, the limited edition.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't know if there's any liner DVD Blu-ray equivalent of liner.
If you want to pause real quick, I'll go grab the box and double check.
Sure. Okay, and we're back. Ross has his physical copy. We're going to do this. This is like the physical version of Searching Wikipedia live on air.
Yeah, this is the reissue. Like their original version of this sold out, which includes a little slipcase. So this reissue does not. It does have the the little copy on the back of it, which has a couple paragraphs describing the contents. I think it's the exact same text you get on the webpage for it on TerraVision's website. So
yeah, it's a great soundtrack either way.
Yeah.
Like that was a little bit from it. I was just playing while Ross was searching his living room.
Yeah, it does not have any additional information, unlike some of the other releases from TerraVision. But I think that was just But yeah, I'm sure the commentary has a lot of background information. But yeah,
nice. Mm-hmm. That's cool. I think I want to move on from Dante's, which is definitely go check it out. It's a shame it's not like anywhere on streaming with all the soundtracks, but I get it. Yeah,
the rights issues alone, especially with those other two commentaries, would probably it'd be interesting. TerraVision has not really put much of their catalog on streaming things. Copyright is not on streaming yet, so
damn, the world has to see. Okay, so quickly then, the other thing I wanted to talk about in terms of rescoring, I'm going to give a little bit of context, and then we can talk about the rescoring of one specifically, which will be, I think, a slightly shorter conversation, is the Soderbergh variations I mentioned, which is interesting. So Steven Soderbergh, American director. Everyone talks about Tarantino. I really consider him the pioneer of American independent cinema. Late 80s, did Sex, Lies, and Videotape, which was one of the first ones, along with like Pulp Fiction stuff, to be like, oh, we made this for like $1 million and it made tens of millions of dollars. There's something here with all these young filmmakers, kind of this revitalization of the 70s New American style of like getting away from big studio films, which is funny because as is tradition, capitalism basically immediately subsumed it into like a faux indie thing throughout the 90s, where they would be like, oh yeah, it's backed by Greenlight Pictures, which is still Fox, but it's Fox Greenlight. There's like this silly pseudo indie. But anyway, Soderbergh has a really interesting career. Blew up with Sex, Lies, and Videotape. Did a bunch of trash that were not very good in the 90s. And then decided to come back and just start making Hollywood films. And he'd make like Ocean's 11. But they take his Ocean's 11 money and go make like 2 or 3 little things he wanted to do. And then come back and make something big. All the Ocean's movies are huge. He did all the Magic Mike, Contagion. Haywire.
Mike. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. He has a weird fucking filmography because he'll just come back and just do like, I need a bunch of money to make all the other stuff I want to make. Yeah. So, I'm going to do Ocean's 13 and then go make a 2-part documentary on Che Guevara. It's like, nice. And then come back and make like Contagion and then go make Haywire and then make Magic Mike and then make Logan Lucky. It's like a very, very bizarre filmography. But one of the things he does on the side is basically recut and kind of reimagine popular films. So there's really 4 that people talk about there. I think he kind of stopped, which is interesting because he himself had advocated that what he was doing was copyright infringement because he's like a copyright hawk. Mm-hmm. It's very bizarre. But he's done a recut of Psycho, taking a combination of both Gus Van Sant and Hitchcock's versions and cutting them together into his own version. Yeah. Which I haven't been able to find. He did a version of Heaven's Gate that was like half as long, basically, which is, makes sense. It's a long one. Oh, yeah. I mean, that's a notorious film, too, because it fucking ended a studio and the reputation of the director. Yeah. It's a massive flop. Yeah. It was like almost 4 hours long. So he made like a 2-hour version of it. And then he did a recut of 2001, which largely tightens it up. I think he removed like a half hour, a lot of like the Dawn of Man stuff and cut together some of those other ones and sort of compressed some sequences. I think that's interesting because that's, I think, clearly a film that meant a lot to him because he did his own remake of Solaris with George Clooney from the classic Russian film. Yeah, that was so. Yeah, so he was clearly influenced heavily by that. Yeah, trying to do like his own recut of it. Mm-hmm. But the one from a standpoint of rescoring that's interesting is he took Raiders of the Lost Ark, the 81 Steven Spielberg classic, founded the adventure romance genre of the 80s, like that look. Yeah, it really did, didn't it? Yeah. Yeah, or brought some of that pulp styling back, I should say. There's other examples before it. Yeah. And he decolorized it, so he regraded it to black and white, I think as best he could from whatever transfer he was working from, because these are all unofficial. These are all bootleg, like that he's doing. So he made this black and white version of it, and then he set it to the Social Network score by Trent Reznor and Angus Ross, which is a Academy Award winning score. It's a great score. It's so cool. It's so interesting to me that like the 9 Inch Nails guy ended up being like a huge like movie soundtrack guy in the. Yeah, as a film composer, he's really pretty prolific these days and has done a lot of really good film scores. Yeah. But there's precedent. Danny Elfman was an Oingo Boingo. Oh, yeah. Before he got into doing films, although Danny Elfman has a style, by which I mean everything he does sounds the same. Yeah. But you're not wrong. So we watched this because it is still floating around a couple days on the internet. Yeah. You know where to look. And it's interesting. Did you read Soderbergh has the blog post where he talks about this, why he did this? Did you read that? I was going to mention is that his reasoning is he felt that there's really a lot of really good craft in like the cinematography and the editing, and that this kind of people get hung up on like the great Harrison Ford performance, the John Williams score, etc. And he wanted to kind of help people refocus on what he thought were like the most technical, interesting aspects of the film, which is an exercise you'll do in like when I was in film school, we'd watch stuff with like the sound off in like editing class and stuff. So I get where he's coming from. It's funny though, because I think by picking such a dissonant soundtrack, like I like that Social Network score. It's not an action soundtrack. No, it's not an action soundtrack, which goes back to the, Haley not really doing a horror score for Dante's Inferno. But he also only seemed to be moderately concerned with having it match up with what's on screen, which I don't know. It comes across that way. He may mean something to him, but to me, it just feels like copy paste. Yeah. A little copy paste, but it's interesting because it almost ends up having the opposite of the intended effect where I become hyper focused on the score. And I think the only times I really zoned in, and this is maybe the second or third time I watched it. We watched it a couple days ago. Yeah. And I actually do think if you kind of let the score wash over you, because the Social Network is like this synth industrial-ish, but not like gritty industrial. It's like anxiety. Moody. It's like anxiety and moody. Yeah. A little darker and stuff. So it really works in its own way. But if you kind of let it just wash over you, I think it ultimately ended up being effective because again, during the most recent watching, most of the time I was just like, God damn, this is an incredible set piece.
Mm-hmm.
I think where it really struck me was there's the famous fight on the plane where Marion's in the plane and Indy's fighting the large Nazi boxer.
Oh, yeah.
Around the plane.
Yeah, yeah.
And I was like, man, what a set piece for 81.
Yeah.
And it is. It's masterfully edited. It's great put together. You have such an incredible sense of space and where everybody is, even though it's like it's like a confusing scene in, air quotes, real life, because they're fighting around this plane that's kind of symmetrical. So what side of the plane is everybody on? And the plane is spinning in a circle because one of the wheel blocks got removed and the propellers are on. Mm-hmm. But it's like this whole sense of space is preserved. And I was like, God damn, that is, if he wanted to do this, pay attention to the shooting and editing, instead of doing the whole movie, he should have just done clips of it. Not from an attention span standpoint, but this is what you should be focusing on if you really want people to learn about making action films.
Oh, yeah. Weirdly enough, I kind of came to a similar realization, but it was a little later during the truck escape scene. Where, they're fighting and he's getting on the truck and they're driving through the pylons, and then the two of them look at each other, and it's like the visual language is so strong you don't even need sound to explain that what's happening and these little story beats that are happening. The guy falling right in the windshield, looking at them, stunned. Yeah. And then rereading I didn't read the blog post until after we watched the movie, and I was like, oh, that's why he chose the soundtrack. Because he wanted to focus on the visuals. He wanted you not to think too much about the music.
Yep.
Yeah.
Again, I think it takes 2 viewings, though, for that effect to become in. So, yeah, it's one of those things where if you can find a copy of it in the deep, dark corners of the internet, it's worth checking out. It's one of those things where I, almost wish I could, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, erase my memory of the Raiders of the Lost Ark and then watch it, having never seen the film, watch that version. Because I truly believe you could probably tell everything that's going on just from visual language alone in that film. I actually don't think you'd be confused at all. Not that it's conveying an incredibly complex plot with lots of twists and interpersonal relationships, but it's just visually completely works as a silent film, I think.
Oh, yeah. Raiders does, because, it is strong action. There's also a lot of really interesting use of visual contrast in the visual language of the film, really high brights and silhouetting and shadows. There's a lot. It's a striking movie visually, but not abstract to the point where it's always instantly understandable. A child could follow it, but there's depth and complexity that adult could appreciate. That rare movie that can hit both ends, speak to everybody. So, and using this very consistent soundtrack, the Social Network, it actually really adds to this, because it becomes an extended Trenton Reznor, especially with the black and white. It becomes more industrial too, these weird, everything's weathered steel and leather and just this we'd call it diesel punk these days, but that was just World War II. It does fit in a weird way. So yeah, because Soderbergh could have easily grabbed an action movie soundtrack or fucking Blade.
Yeah, do a full EDM 90s. What was I say is that Raiders is a really interesting example too for me personally, because I've seen this is a very minimalist version of that movie, and I've seen an incredibly maximalist version of it too, where when I was in Boston they did a live play along to it, so it's in the theater. On a big screen, but then they have the orchestra in the, in the hall playing along, conducted, the Boston, it's Boston Pops that did it, I think. And that's interesting because that's such an over the top example of that. Because then you just you're in the room with the orchestra. So you just have this big John Williams score going ham.
Yeah.
And it's actually interesting because they had the dialogue, but they did all of the musical stings. So not just we played the theme song over the credits. They do all the little violin stings for seeing clues and
oh wow
and everything. So yeah, that's the most extreme version of that movie you can imagine. Done both.
Nice. Totally unrelated to any of the movies we talked before, but I just remembered there is a silent film called The Man with a Movie Camera, which is a 1929 silent documentary film from the Soviet Union. And in 2002, a group called the Cinematic Orchestra rescored it, and that was a soundtrack. That's an album I love. I've listened to it. It's like this new jazz electronica. It was put out by Ninja Tune, which is a record label I love. And also, if you look up Man with a Movie Camera, because it's a Soviet film in 1929, very public domain, and so people have been, there's literally like 20 or 30 rescorings of it from 1983 to this year. So everyone's like, yeah, you just got to do Man with a Movie Camera. It's a very visually appealing movie, and there's a lot of things you could do with it. It's also a movie where the director had notes on the soundtrack, and so you can sort of interpret those as you wish. Anyways, yeah, it's just a good album, Man with a Movie Camera by Cinematic Orchestra. So
important lesson: rescoring films. It's neat.
It's neat, yeah. But it's transformative. That's the point to do it, is to transform it. Not to just, oh, I could have done it better. Like, not to, yeah, it's to do the not obvious thing. Thanks for listening so much to this episode. We had a lot of fun doing research for it, getting to watch some interesting movies and meditating upon the nature of music and film. But our next episode, we're going back to the dungeons. The dungeon synth. Well, dungeon synth plus drum and bass or breakcore, EDM.
Dungeon synthtronica.
Yeah. Dungeon synth. It can be fast. It can have a high BPM, it turns out. We'll find some albums that do that. So it'd be cool. Don't forget, we have a Patreon, patreon.com/nightclerkradio, where we have a lot of interesting bonus episodes. We just talked about Frutiger Aero, which is an aesthetic. Do you remember Windows 7?
I do.
Do you remember the Nintendo Wii? That's, if you like that aesthetic, join our Patreon and you can listen to us explain what the hell that aesthetic is. It's pretty neat.
Everyone loves Frutiger Aero. You just don't know it.
Yeah, you do. Yeah. It's way better than what came after it. Everything became flat and flavorless and boring.
That's right.
We are on social media. We're on Twitter, Blue Sky. We have a Facebook page. We have a website, nightclerkradio.com. So tell your friends, tell your enemies about that website. We are, of course, happy for any reviews, any ratings. You can put us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts. They probably have a way for you to rate and review your podcast. So help us become more discoverable as it is. And we're on YouTube as well. We have all the episodes mirrored on YouTube.
Yep.
Well, thank you so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye.
Bye.